It's good to see you this morning. Isn't it nice to have some sunshine this morning? A little break from this rain. I don't know about you, but that was a lot of rain this week. I'm not going to lie. That was a lot of rain, more than I like to have. And a couple times I had the thoughts of moving to Arizona or something like that. But I was like, no, the sun will be back. It will be back. So anyways, great to see you this morning. And go Hawks, yeah? No? Okay, never mind. Next year. So disappointing, you know. You get so amped up for a game, and I went home. I did such a good job. The energy that I gave to not talking to anybody who might tell me what the score is, all right? And because I'm recording on DVR, and I get home, and Crystal was running some errands, and I was home with one or two of my boys and watching the game, and within 20 minutes, I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me, right? Oh man, so frustrating. But here we are. Well, if you are just now kind of coming in and joining us for this series called What Jesus Meant, we're taking a few weeks to look at the Beatitudes and exploring some of Jesus' what I call difficult words, right? And the Sermon on the Mount are full of them. And really throughout the Gospels, Jesus had a knack for saying difficult words that make you, if you're like me, you read it and sometimes, seriously, Jesus, right? That's why I've titled this message, Seriously, Jesus, because this week is one of those weeks where when I read this particular beatitude, I'm not sure, in all honesty, in all transparency, I'm not sure exactly what it means. I'm not sure exactly if I'm living it out the way Jesus intended, and I just have to believe that I'm doing the best that I can, right? If you've missed past messages, you can always go to our website and watch previous messages or subscribe to our weekly email that goes out. It usually comes about Thursday or Friday, and at the bottom of that email is the video from the previous week. So it's always a good way to keep up, because we know that things happen, and you can't be at church 52 weeks a year. If you are, that's pretty good. That's actually more than me. So that's really good. Let me start with Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." This has been a tough message to put together, because this is a very difficult word where, again, I find myself saying, seriously? Really, Jesus? Like, what does this even mean? Let's forget what, they will inherit the earth means. That's a whole different thing to wrestle with, right? But meekness, I go to my favorite commentary on the Gospel of Matthew. I've had it for years, and it's my go-to resource from a theologian who just helps unpack the Gospel of Matthew, right? And I open it up to this one section, and the very first line that he wrote in his commentary, okay, a professional theologian, right, trained, all this stuff, and these were his words: meekness, the most untranslatable of all New Testament words. So thank you very much for that. Waste of money that commentary was, right? That's what I was left with. So I thought, well, I guess I'm on my own, And sometimes when I find myself working on something like my car or a house project, and I find myself, you ever find yourself just looking at it, right? Say it's a plumbing thing under the sink, and you just find yourself looking at it and wondering, what's the source of this problem? And you stare at it, and the more you stare at it, you think, maybe somehow supernaturally I'm going to suddenly come to the understanding of how I'm going to fix this, And then you realize, well, that's not going to happen. And so if you're like me, you go to YouTube, right? And you Google, how to fix such and such, and YouTube is great, right? And you can find videos and you follow the video, and voila, it's fixed. And so I sat at my desk, and I thought, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. If I stare at this long enough, it's all going to come to me, right? I'm going to suddenly be enlightened as to what Jesus means here. And then I thought, nope, that's not going to happen. I'm actually going to have to do some work here. And then I thought, I could just go to YouTube and find someone else's sermon, right? And just play that, No, that's cheating. You can't do that. We've got to put the work in. And so my hope today is to leave you with some practical thoughts and some challenges that when you leave here, you have a better understanding of what meekness is, what Jesus' words mean for us today, and give you things that you can hopefully gauge for your life, your faith, in terms of how you're doing in this area. And again, when Jesus says blessed, that word essentially means approval. You have God's approval. This is what God thinks of you. This is what God thinks of you. And so if you get anything out of this message, maybe you just need the reminder today as you leave that you are blessed, that you have God's approval. He is for you. He is for you. He's not against you. And sometimes that good news is what we need to catapult us into growing into a more genuine relationship with the Father. Well, when I say, seriously, Jesus, like that, I say that all the time to my kids, right? I have 4 kids, and they're an energetic bunch, right? And it can be loud, and it can be rambunctious in our house, and there can be wrestling, and wrestling always turns into fighting, and fighting always turns into crying, right? Tears, right? It's all fun and games until someone gets hurt, right? And sometimes when I lose my patience with one of my kids, that's exactly how I say it. So who do we want to pick on today? Taylor, okay? Taylor is 6. He's just my buddy he's 7. I'm sorry. He was with me here all day yesterday and helping me get things set up, and he just loves to help but he can be a bit of a knucklehead, okay? He's the kid that, if there's a kid who's going to trip when he's carrying a full glass of milk, it's him, right? He can be that way, and I find myself sometimes saying, seriously, Taylor? Seriously? Like, how did that happen? How did that happen? And I look at Jesus' words sometimes, and I want to say that. And if you're like me, the temptation is to read a passage like this, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, and to want to just skip over it. Next, because I look at poor in the spirit, I look at especially blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, and I get that. I can read that, and it resonates with me instantly, because I know what comfort is. I shared about my grieving last week, my stories of grief and sadness and loss, and I get it, we get it. But meekness is a very difficult word to translate. It's a very difficult word to understand. And so when we find ourselves tempted, when we read Jesus' words, and we find ourselves tempted to just move along, to go to the next chapter, to go to the next teaching, whatever it is, and just kind of say, I'll come back to that later. When we find ourselves tempted to do that, we have to ask ourselves, we have to remind ourselves, because we would all agree that Jesus is the greatest teacher to ever walk this earth, whether we follow him or not. Most people agree that he is a great teacher. And so when we're tempted to skip over the difficult words, we have to ask ourselves, he's either a reliable guide to the Father or he is not. We either take his teachings seriously or we do not at all. And when we ask ourselves this question, am I taking Jesus' teachings seriously? Or am I just skipping over it because I don't want to put the work into it? I don't want to put the time, the prayer into asking God through his Spirit to reveal to us what he means, right? Essentially what we're saying is he's not altogether the most reliable guide to the Father in our life. And I live in that temptation all the time when I read the Bible to say, I studied this for years. I still don't know what it means entirely. Next, flip the page, right? Well, it's a tough sermon to put together when I choose to use my dog as a sermon illustration. And that's what I'm going to do today, okay? Because when I thought of my dog, I thought, okay, this actually makes sense to me in terms of what I think Jesus is trying to teach here. So I have a picture of my dog right there. Actually, be honest with you, that's not my dog, okay? But I tried all week long to capture my dog while he was running, and dogs don't run on command. They'll sit, they'll roll over and do things, but they don't run on command, okay? And I was like, ugh, come on, run for me, run, do something. Because I wanted to capture a picture like this. My dog looks exactly like this. This is a Decker Rat Terrier. Okay, many people have heard of a rat terrier. They're small. A Decker Rat Terrier is basically a giant rat terrier, about the size of a female Rottweiler, okay? And my dog's name is Sparky, okay? Not a vicious name at all right? In fact, he lives up to his name, Sparky. There's one thing he does not like, he hates in this world, and that is fireworks. And a couple years ago, every 4th of July, we have a block party with friends where the whole street comes together, cul-de-sac, and we go crazy, right? And one of my kids went up to the house to go get something and forgot to close the door. You know, kids do that. They get excited and they just run out. Well, Sparky came down there right when someone was lighting off a fountain, you know, all the sparks. And Sparky jumped on that thing and was trying to bite all the sparks in the air, and he lived up to his name, Sparky. A friend who had joined us, who wasn't a part of the neighborhood, actually asked, is that dog's name really Sparky? Right? He does live up to his name. But he is big. He is extremely muscular. Oftentimes when I'm walking him, there are people who kind of move away to the side because they see the girth on his chest. He's very muscular, right? But Sparky is very gentle, amazingly gentle, and so patient. Like I said, 4 kids, it can get kind of rowdy. And when we brought him to our house 5 years ago, we adopted him from a family who was moving to Hawaii and couldn't take him. My kids were a lot younger. Brooklyn wasn't even born yet, and I can remember Brooklyn when she's learning to crawl, you know, actually using Sparky to pull herself up, right? And kids crawling on him and playing rough with him, and he just takes it all in stride. He's so patient and self-controlled. My goodness, I know I have the perfect dog. You all want my dog now, don't you? When we first had him, I wasn't used to having a dog, and I was eating pizza, and I set it down on the ottoman, a plate of pizza. And I went to the kitchen to get something to drink, forgetting that it had been years since we had had a dog, and I was getting used to this. And I came back, and there he was, laying right by the ottoman, and my pizza was still there. He's just staring at it, and I can still do that today. I can just set it down. I don't even have to tell him. He knows, the control, right? The self-control. It's awesome. It's awesome. I don't want another dog, honestly, after he's gone, because I don't think another dog will be able to live up to Sparky. He is lost it. He's just staring at the grass. And he's staring and waiting and waiting and waiting. He can hear the moles. And as soon as the right time comes, he digs ferociously, and he'll snare that mole right out of the ground and kill it. A couple years ago, I'm doing some work in the front yard, and he was off leash in the front yard with me. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see him sprint across the front yard towards the street, where we have a line of trees. And he had chased a squirrel up the tree, right? And I stood there and I just watched. I watched the squirrel. What's the squirrel going to do? I watched Sparky. What's Sparky going to do? The squirrel is in a bit of a conundrum, right? Well, that squirrel got the bright idea within 30 seconds or so to make a run for it. So he went down the other side of the tree trunk and tried to run for it. And Sparky caught that squirrel, grabbed it in his jaws, and just clamped down, and that squirrel today is in heaven climbing trees somewhere, right? And my jaw just dropped. I could not believe what I was seeing. I saw this fierceness in my dog. I saw my dog do something actually kind of violent. It was gross. And he didn't eat it or nothing. He killed it instantly and dropped it. That was it. And I had never seen Sparky show that kind of aggression, ever. But that's what he's bred to do. That's in his nature, right? And he's learned to be patient and self-controlled and gentle. And I use my dog as a silly sermon illustration to say that I think meekness looks a lot like that. That we live in this constant balance, this tension between the desire of wanting the Holy Spirit, as Galatians 5 says, to produce within us gentleness, self-control, patience, right? God produces within us humility. Some of us are more natural in some of those areas than others, all right? If you tend to have an addictive personality, self-control is going to be harder for you. but you may be a very patient person naturally, right? And if you're like me, I have to constantly allow God to work on me in that area, patience. And so we have that side of us, right? The beautiful side, the good side, the God-created side. But we also have this ferocious side, this side what we call our sinful nature. That as long as we live as human beings in this world, we will have our sinful nature. And our sinful nature has the ability to be very destructive and can harm a lot of people and ourselves, right? And Jesus says to these people, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Meekness, I believe, is having that balance between the humility, the control, the gentleness, while understanding and always being very aware of what we can be prone to do and what we can easily slip into, fall into, our sinful nature. And later on in Jesus' ministry in Matthew chapter 11, we see him flipping the coin on the listeners, okay? In this time, there were many, many, many rabbis, many teachers. Jesus was a rabbi, a teacher. He wasn't the only one on the scene here. There were many religious leaders and rabbis and teachers. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 11, he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." Now, every rabbi believed in God's law. God's law, essentially, for them and for devout Jews today, God's law is the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, okay, written by Moses. The first 5 books of the Old Testament, that's God's law. Everything comes under that, okay? And to take it a step further, every rabbi has their interpretations of God's law, what they believe it means, and then they have their sets of rules for how to obey God's law, right? And when you followed those rules, and when you obeyed their rules, the rabbi's rules, you had God's approval or blessing, okay? Jesus comes on the scene, and he says, "Take my yoke upon you." That set of rules that I was talking about, that every rabbi had, guess what they call that? It's called a yoke. Every rabbi has their interpretation of God's law, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and they have their rules for how to obey it, how to follow it. And these guys were so intense with it that you could take a farmer, okay? You could take a farmer, and a farmer could be hearing Jesus' words and think like the yoke for their oxen, right? And that would be correct too, because it guides them, right? It's having all this energy and strength, but it's harnessed, right? And they're able to stay on the straight path to plow the fields. A farmer could have a rabbi say to them, well, if you want God's blessing, if you want God's approval, you not only need to tithe 1/10 of your income, but now you need to tithe 1/10 of every spice, of every herb, of every carrot, every potato, every pomegranate that you grow, every olive, whatever, okay? The rules became burdensome. Nobody could live up to these expectations, these rules. And if you grew up hearing those kinds of rules, you probably grew up feeling like you don't have God's approval. And that resonates with some of you right now. Because some of you grew up with religion, where pastors, parents, teachers, someone made faith so much about rules and what you cannot do that you never knew the freedom and the rest for your soul that Jesus promises when we follow his way. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. You find that almost impossible? Yeah, I would too. Take my yoke upon you. For he says, I am humble and gentle at heart. Sounds like meekness. Follow my example. Take my teachings, my ways upon you. You will find rest for your soul. His burden is light. Doesn't mean that Jesus is saying following me is easy. But it's a whole lot more freeing than living under the oppression of rules and constantly wondering, questioning, am I good enough? Am I living up to God's expectations? Does he approve of me? Do I have his blessing and his favor? And so when we take Jesus' yoke upon us, his teachings, his ways, we then have to sort of calibrate our lives the Jesus way. We have to balance things. And how we do that could be a list a mile long. But I'm going to be nice, and I'm going to let you out at noon today and not at 3, okay? I could keep you longer because there's nothing to watch when we get home, right? There's no Seahawks. So we shortened the service for you last week, so I should go over this week just to make up for lost time. But I want to highlight two, what I believe, very central, important elements to calibrating our life the Jesus way so that we learn meekness in our life. Meekness, the balance of humility, gentleness, self-control with all the knowledge and awareness of our sinful nature, right? And living in that tension. The first thing is we have to be teachable. We have to be teachable. Several years ago, before I met Crystal and early in our relationship and whatnot, I was a high school basketball coach in Tacoma. And every season brought new challenges because you had new crops of students come in. You had students who would transfer in, right? You had different things. Every year it looked a little different. And there was one particular year where we had 2 guards who were incredibly gifted basketball players. You saw them play as high school students, and you immediately you watched them play, how effortless it was. You've seen it before in student athletes, right? And you just think, what a God-given talent. Right? It just came easy for these guys. Both had the potential right off the bat to have full rides to play basketball, right? And here's the deal. One of them was very teachable, or in coach speak, coachable. One was very teachable. He would listen to the coaches and actually encourage insights and feedback. How can I get better? Asking questions. Very teachable. And he went on to be very successful and play through college and be very successful. He's doing great today in life, right? The other would look you in the eye all the time, listen to what you're saying, and go out and do the opposite. Because he always felt like he knew better than all the coaches. And it was a very difficult kid to work with, right? All that talent, all that potential, and you just felt like you're beating their head against the wall, like, just please listen to me. Just listen to me. 15 years later, you can see what a teachable heart can do to a young person as they become older. The differences in their life as adults is very dramatic, very, very different. There's something about having a teachable heart, not just as a child. My kids are in youth sports, and I'm always telling them, listen to your coach, listen to your coach. Even if I don't like necessarily or agree necessarily with what the coach is saying, I want them to be coachable, teachable. Listen to your coach. Because I know that it's not just about this one season. This will be a benefit to them as they get older. We need to be teachable to Jesus' yoke, to Jesus' way. We either believe his words or we don't. We either obey his teachings and follow them or we don't at all. We have to be teachable. And that's not easy because it means being submissive. It means saying, I'm coming under your authority, God, not mine. And I don't know about you, maybe this is why this was such a tough sermon to put together. Because deep in my heart, I know that I struggle with meekness at times because I don't like the word submissive, right? Lots of people, we don't like that word, submit. I kind of like being in charge of my life. And yet, I also know at this point in my faith that I'm a whole lot better off if I'm not. My wife is nodding her head. Come on. She's like, trust me, she is. When God is in control, everything's different. When I'm teachable, this faith journey is a whole lot more fun. And religion is then out the door. Friends, if reading the Bible and prayer and coming to church and worshiping God and all that, if that's beginning to feel burdensome to you, if you're not finding freedom in that, then I'm going to be blunt. You're struggling with religion. Your struggle isn't with Jesus. It's with religion. And it might be because of something that was done in your past or what, but maybe that just means it's time to give God full authority in your life. Take his yoke upon you. Find rest for your soul, because this faith, this following Jesus, while it's not always easy, it's far from being religion, rules, and earning things, right? The second thing, the second element to learning to calibrate our lives is we have to be self-controlled. This is where the rubber meets the road. Easier said than done, right? One word, one harmful, out of control action can kill, eradicate years of character building in your life. And here's the honest truth. Not everybody that we encounter, not every family member, not every neighbor, not every friend, not every coworker is going to be as forgiving and merciful as we would like them to be. And not everybody gives second chances. That's the unfortunate truth. One lashing out, one loss of self-control, physically losing control, can ruin years of character building. Self-control is huge when it comes to living a meek life. It's having that balance of knowing that underneath the surface can be an aggressive, destructive person. Your words can sometimes be destructive. Some of us here today, as adults, we still struggle with self-esteem because of something that was said to us by a teacher, a coach, a pastor, a parent, a friend when we were younger, and it's stuck with us. It takes me about 30 seconds to pinpoint two things that were spoken to me as a younger adult that still ring in my head if I let it. And it's been years. And these people they're in heaven now, and they can still have space in my head if I let them, right? We have to be self-controlled. While God is full of mercy and grace, new every single day for us, not everybody out there is going to be that way towards us. Meekness has a lot to do about our interpersonal relationships. And so, I'll close with this. As you drive home today, as you're talking with your family, your spouse, your friends, as maybe you're going out to eat with some friends or having people over, maybe you're just going to be spending alone time today. I don't know. But I want to leave you with this question. What does this beatitude of meekness mean for us as a church? I'm going beyond you as an individual now, and I'm talking about us as a collective body of believers, a community of faith. What does this beatitude of meekness look like for us as a church? Because if I could summarize meekness, it is basically living a humble and submissive life to God. A humble and submissive life to God. It is asking the Holy Spirit to produce within us humility and gentleness, self-control, patience, right? While all the time being very much aware of our sinful nature and how fierce and destructive we can be as human beings if we allow ourselves to be, if we lose that control. Our nature, friends, our nature wants to say, we're the boss, we're in control, we submit to nobody. But our calling to follow Jesus says he is in control. And when we embrace that calling, that Jesus is in control, meekness will come out. Meekness will come out. So let me close with Paul's words in Ephesians chapter 4 as he's speaking to the church. He's teaching the church with pretty blunt words here. Therefore, I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling. For you have been called by God. Always be humble and gentle. There's those two words again, the same words Jesus used about himself. Be patient with each other, making allowance for yourselves, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. The reason I close this message with this challenge about us as a body, as a church, is I really do believe that what our community needs to see is not just Wash Cathedral, but every other church out there leaving their doors unified under the yoke, the teaching of Jesus. You may have been coming to church and following Jesus for a long time. You may be new to this. We can still be unified. What I believe people outside the faith need and are starving and just thirsty for is authenticity from the church. And when I think of meekness, when I think of a body of believers committed together to living under God's control, under his authority, to following Jesus as well as we can, not slandering each other, not gossiping about each other, not speaking lies about each other, right? But unified, as Paul was talking about. Think of the image. Think of how attractive Jesus then becomes to people and how drawn they could become, not to just attending church, that's secondary, but to Jesus, to salvation, to his love, his grace, his mercy. If I asked you today to raise your hand if you've ever experienced something harmful, hurtful, if you've ever been hurt by another person from church, hello, right? It starts with us. It starts with us. This week, the challenge is to invite Jesus to produce within us meekness, the humility, the self-control, the patience, the gentleness, while always being aware. Don't get so confident in your faith, in your growing in your faith, that you lose track, you lose focus of that deep down inside you. You still have this sinful nature, right? Live in that balance. Live in that tension. That's where Jesus wants you. That's where we find meekness. Let's pray.